When you've lived long enough, you start to believe you've already seen the worst life can do to you. I used to believe that too, until the night I opened the door and saw my husband with my son's fiancée. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes, that image burns behind them like a scar that refuses to fade. I was 52 at the time, a woman who thought she had built a steady life, not perfect but stable. I'd been married to Arthur for nearly 30 years. We had one son, Garrett, my pride and my joy, the only thing I ever believed I did right in this world. Arthur and I were not passionate anymore, but we were partners. Or so I thought. We shared morning coffee, exchanged tired smiles, talked about bills, about the weather, about Garrett's future wedding to Brenda, the girl who used to bring me sunflowers every time she came to visit. She called me Mom, long before she was officially part of the family. I loved her like my own daughter. And that's what made the betrayal unbearable. The night it happened, I had driven home early from work. The sky was still heavy with rain, and the house was wrapped in that soft, dim light that comes before sunset. Garrett was supposed to be away on a business trip, his first one since getting promoted. Arthur told me he'd stay home to handle a few things. I thought nothing of it. When I stepped into the living room, I noticed 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table. I remember smiling at first, thinking how sweet it was that Arthur had poured one for me like we used to do on Friday nights. But as I walked closer, I heard laughter from down the hall. Soft, familiar. A woman's voice. At first I thought maybe it was the TV, but then I heard my husband's voice, low, rough, in a way I hadn't heard in years. The sound of it froze me in place. My heart began to race, not from suspicion, but from the primal instinct that something had shattered in the air around me. I followed the sound down the hallway, my hands trembling so badly I had to hold onto the wall. The bedroom door. My bedroom door was slightly open, and there they were, Arthur and Brenda. The world stopped. For a few seconds, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. Her back was arched, his hands gripping her hips, their breaths tangled in the kind of rhythm I hadn't felt from him in years. I didn't scream, I didn't even cry. I just stood there watching my entire life crumble in one silent, unbearable moment. Brenda saw me first. Her body froze mid-motion, and her voice cracked into a gasp that made Arthur turn around. When our eyes met, he looked like a man struck by lightning, half guilt, half defiance, as if daring me to acknowledge it. I remember whispering, "How could you?" but even my own voice sounded far away, like it came from someone else's throat. Brenda scrambled off the bed, wrapping the sheet around her like that thin piece of fabric could protect her from the truth. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Not what it looks like." That line, that pathetic, rehearsed line, was the spark that woke something savage in me. I laughed. Not a soft, broken laugh, a bitter, shaking one. "Then by all means," I said quietly, "explain what it is." Arthur didn't speak. He didn't reach for me. He didn't even apologize. He just stood there silent, his face pale and his jaw clenched, a coward who'd rather drown in guilt than take responsibility for it. I turned around and walked out of that room, my hands cold, my legs numb. I remember how surreal everything felt, the sound of my heels against the wooden floor, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the way the rain started to fall harder outside. It was like the world kept going, unaware that mine had just stopped. I sat in the kitchen for hours that night, staring at the wall, waiting for anger to come. But what came first was pity, not for them, but for me. For the woman who had cooked dinners, ironed shirts, smiled through loneliness, believed in loyalty long after it had died. When Garrett came home 3 days later, everything inside me collapsed again, but in a different way. He walked in smiling, holding a bouquet of lilies for me. He said Brenda had been acting distant and he wanted to surprise her when he got back. I felt my throat close. I couldn't destroy him with the truth, not yet. Arthur, on the other hand, pretended nothing had happened. He sat at the breakfast table reading the paper like the man I used to know hadn't been replaced by a stranger. Every time I looked at him, I saw the outline of betrayal etched across his face. But Garrett deserved to hear it from me, not whispers, not rumors. 2 days later, I asked him to sit down. He must have sensed something because his smile faded the moment he saw my hands trembling. "Mom, what's wrong?" The words refused to form. "How do you tell your son that the woman he's about to marry slept with his father? How do you say that? The two people he trusted most had turned your home into a graveyard, so I said it slowly, gently, like pulling glass from skin. When it was done, he didn't speak. He just stared at me, blinking as if trying to reset his brain. Then he stood, walked out the door, and I heard his car engine roar to life. For 2 weeks, I didn't hear from him. He wouldn't answer my calls. When he finally came home, he looked 10 years older. He told me he'd confronted Brenda. She confessed everything. And then she said something that turned my stomach, that she was pregnant. He laughed when he told me, but it wasn't a laugh I'd ever heard before. It was hollow. "I don't even know if it's mine, Mom," he said. I didn't have the heart to tell him that deep down I already knew the answer. That night, Arthur came into our bedroom with that same empty calm he'd worn since I found him. He said he was sorry, that it just happened that Brenda had needed comfort. The excuses were almost insulting. "Do you love her?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know." And in that moment, I realized the man I'd built my life around was gone, replaced by someone who could destroy his own family and call it confusion. So I made my decision. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I sat at my desk and began to write not a letter, not a note, but a declaration of freedom. I wrote my name at the top of the divorce papers and signed every page with the calm certainty of a woman who'd finally stopped begging for decency. When he came out, still toweling his hair, I handed them to him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice small. "Closure," I said. He tried to protest, to say we could work it out, but there was nothing left to fix. You can't rebuild trust on ashes. A week later, I packed what I needed and left. Garrett moved out too, though he didn't go far. He wanted to stay near me, like we were the only survivors of a shipwreck. But fate wasn't finished with us yet, because a month after I left, Brenda reached out. She wanted to meet. She said she was scared. And I agreed, not out of compassion, but curiosity. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from understanding just how low people will go when they mistake love for weakness. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where the air always smelled like burnt espresso and regret. Brenda was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table wrapped in a pale sweater that made her look fragile. But I knew better now. Fragile wasn't the word for her. Dangerous was. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes filled with something that wasn't guilt, it was fear. Real trembling fear. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just sat down, folded my hands neatly, and waited. I wanted to hear her version, the lies she'd practiced, the excuses she thought would save her. She didn't start with an apology. She started with justification. "I didn't plan for any of this," she said softly. "It just happened." That phrase again, "it just happened," the same one Arthur had used, like betrayal, was a weather event that blew in without warning instead of a choice made in the dark. She looked up at me, her lips trembling. "I think the baby might be your husband's." The words hung between us like poison. I felt my stomach twist, but I didn't let her see it. "Might be?" I asked, my voice steady. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't know. I thought it was Garrett's at first, but the timing." She trailed off, and for a moment I saw the reality sink into her, the destruction she had caused not just to me, but to herself. "You destroyed 2 men," I said quietly. "A father and a son. Do you realize that?" Her face crumpled. "I didn't mean to." "No," I interrupted. "You didn't care to stop it. There's a difference." She sobbed quietly into her hands. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe even triumph. But I didn't. What I felt was something colder, clarity. I stood up, leaving enough money on the table for her untouched coffee. "You should get a paternity test," I said, turning to leave. "For everyone's sake." As I walked away, I felt her eyes on my back, heavy with the weight of a mistake that couldn't be undone. Garrett didn't want to hear her name again. He buried himself in work, refusing to talk about it. But I could see the cracks in him, the sleepless nights, the silence that had replaced laughter. Every time I heard him in his room, I remembered the little boy who used to sneak into my bed after a nightmare. Now I couldn't protect him from the nightmare we were living. Then one evening there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Arthur stood there. He looked older, thinner, disheveled, like the weight of his choices had finally settled on his shoulders. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "Can we talk?" he asked. I wanted to slam the door. But part of me, the part that had once believed in vows and redemption, hesitated. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd once imagined we'd grow old together. He stared at the family photos on the wall before speaking. I ruined everything, he said. I know that. I didn't answer. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But I need you to know. I didn't love her. It wasn't about that. I was lost. She was there. I was weak. I looked at him for a long time. You weren't lost, Arthur. You were found in all the wrong places. He bowed his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. I didn't move to comfort him. After a while, he whispered, she's gone. What do you mean? Brenda, she left town. Didn't tell anyone where she was going. She said she couldn't face any of us. I didn't say it out loud, but I understood. Shame is its own kind of exile. Arthur stood to leave, but paused at the door. If I could take it all back. You can't, I said simply. And with that, he walked out of my life for the last time. Weeks turned into months. The divorce finalized quietly. No arguments, no courtroom drama, just the quiet signing of papers that ended 30 years of something that used to be love. Garrett eventually came to me one night, his face pale. Mom, he said. Brenda reached out. I froze. She had the baby, he continued. She sent me a picture. It's a boy. My heart sank. What did she say? She said she's sorry and that she got the test. He hesitated, then handed me his phone. On the screen was a photo of a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Underneath a message, he's Arthur's. I'm sorry. Garrett's hands were shaking. I reached out and took them in mine. You don't have to carry this, I whispered. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. I just needed to hear you say that. We sat together for a long time, saying nothing. The silence wasn't empty this time, it was healing. A year later, life had found its rhythm again. I bought a small house by the sea, a quiet place where mornings began with gulls and ended with sunsets that painted the sky in forgiveness. I started a small catering business, something I'd always wanted but never had time for. People called me strong, but strength isn't something you're born with. It's what grows in the cracks of your brokenness. Garrett visited often. He laughed again, slowly, carefully, like someone learning to live in his own skin. One evening, as we sat watching the ocean, he turned to me and said, You know, Mom, I think I finally understand what you meant when you said forgiveness isn't for them. It's for us. I smiled. Took you long enough? We laughed, and for the first time it didn't hurt. But fate, it seems, loves unfinished stories. One afternoon a letter arrived, no return address, just my name written in a shaky hand I recognized instantly. It was from Brenda. She wrote that she had left town to raise the baby alone, far from the shadows of what she'd done. She said she had nothing left, no money, no support, and that the baby was sick. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she asked for help. I sat with that letter for hours, reading it over and over, my heart caught between rage and compassion. I thought about the woman who had destroyed my family, the girl who had once called me Mom, and the child who had no fault in any of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves outside my window reminded me of how life keeps moving even when we want it to stop. In the morning, I made my decision. I packed a small bag and drove out of town. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I needed to see her, not to punish, not to forgive, but to look her in the eyes one last time and decide what kind of woman I wanted to be. Because sometimes closure doesn't come when you burn the bridge. It comes when you decide whether or not to rebuild it. I found her 2 hours outside the city in a weathered apartment complex, whose walls looked as tired as the people walking in and out. The building smelled faintly of mildew and cheap detergent, the kind of scent that sticks to places where hope feels temporary. Brenda opened the door before I even knocked twice. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but spiritually. Her hair was dull, her eyes hollow, her body thin in a way that spoke of exhaustion, not vanity. When she saw me standing there, her breath caught. You came, she whispered. I nodded. You asked for help. She stepped aside silently and I walked into the apartment. The place was barely furnished, a second-hand couch, a cracked table, a crib near the window. The baby lay inside, wrapped in a faded blue blanket. He was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling, with the soft rhythm of innocence that neither of his parents deserved to touch. I walked closer, unable to stop myself from looking. His hair was dark Arthur's color, and his mouth had that same small downturn when he slept. My heart clenched, not with anger, but with something heavier. Pity. Brenda watched me carefully, as if waiting for me to explode, to scream, to finally unleash what I had every right to unleash. but I couldn't. Does Garrett know where you are? I asked. She shook her head. No, he blocked me after the test. I didn't blame him. And Arthur, her voice cracked. He sent money for a few months, then stopped responding. He said he wanted to move on. Of course he did. Arthur never stayed long enough to face the consequences of his own destruction. He left the mess for everyone else to clean up. Is the baby sick? I asked softly. She nodded. Congenital heart defect. He needs surgery soon. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry the way people do when they want sympathy. She cried the way people do when they're empty, slow, silent, ashamed. I don't expect anything, she said. I just thought, you should know. I looked at her, then really looked. The once beautiful girl who had stolen everything from me was now a shell haunted by the echoes of her choices. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a strange, painful understanding. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check enough to cover the baby's surgery and a few months of living expenses. I set it on the table. Brenda froze. I can't take this. You can, I said quietly, and you will. The child didn't choose any of this. He deserves a chance to live. Her lips trembled. Why would you do this for me? I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it for him. Because someone has to end this cycle of pain, and it sure as hell isn't going to be you or Arthur. She broke, then her knees buckling as she fell to the floor, sobbing into her hands. I didn't move to comfort her. I just stood there watching the woman who'd shattered my life finally feel the weight of her own actions. After a while, I turned to leave. My hand was on the doorknob when she whispered, I don't deserve your kindness. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. No, I said softly. You don't. But kindness isn't something you earn. It's something you give so you can sleep at night. And then I walked out. Driving back home, the sunset bled across the sky like spilled fire, crimson gold fading into dusk. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face, cleansing me in a way tears never could. When I reached my house by the sea, Garrett was waiting outside. I could tell from his face that he knew where I had gone. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with those same eyes that used to search mine for comfort when he was little. Did you see her? He asked finally. Yes. He hesitated. Is the baby really? I nodded. Yes, and he's sick. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. You helped her, didn't you? I smiled faintly. I helped the child. He exhaled slowly, sitting down on the steps. You always do the right thing, Mom. Even when it hurts. I sat beside him, watching the waves crash softly against the shore. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, I said. Sometimes it feels like ripping out the last piece of your anger and letting it float away. Garrett nodded, resting his elbows on his knees. I don't hate her anymore, he said quietly. I thought I did, but I don't. I just feel sorry for her. That's when you know you've healed, I said. When pity replaces hatred. We sat in silence for a long time, the ocean whispering beneath the twilight sky. Months passed. The seasons turned. Brenda never contacted me again, but one day a postcard arrived, a simple photo of a baby smiling in a hospital bed, a scar faintly visible across his chest. On the back, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, He's okay now. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into my drawer. I didn't tell Garrett. Some peace belongs to silence. Life began to bloom again in small, gentle ways. My catering business flourished. I started teaching cooking classes to women rebuilding their lives after divorce. Sometimes after class, we'd sit together with cups of tea and share stories, the kind that were too raw for polite company, but too human to keep inside. One evening, as I was cleaning up after class, I found myself thinking about Arthur, where he was, whether he ever thought of us. I didn't miss him, not in the way love misses, but in the way grief sometimes lingers like an old bruise. And then one afternoon, as if summoned by thought, he appeared. He stood at the gate of my house, looking older, slower. His hair had gone fully gray. His shoulders slumped like the years had finally caught up with him. I walked outside, crossing my arms. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you, he said softly. And Garrett, if he'll let me. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. Some boundaries don't need walls. They exist in the air between 2 people who have already said everything that mattered. He sighed. I heard about the baby, about what you did, How? Brenda wrote to me, he said. She said you saved her child. I didn't answer. He looked at me for a long time. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I see now what I destroyed. And I've been paying for it every day. I looked at him, at the man who had once been my husband, my friend, my betrayal. Good, I said. Maybe that means there's still a piece of your soul left. He smiled sadly. You always had a way of making even damnation sound poetic. He turned to leave, then hesitated. Do you hate me? I thought about it. About the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the years I'd lost. Then I shook my head. No. Hating you would mean you still matter. He flinched not from cruelty but from truth, and then he walked away into the gray horizon that matched his hair. Years later, people sometimes ask me if I ever found love again. The truth is, I did, but not in another person. I found it in my peace, in my purpose, in my ability to wake up each morning without bitterness on my tongue. Because sometimes love isn't something you find in another heart. It's something you rebuild in your own after the fire. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it, just so you could be free?